in the early 1980s, in the height of the video game boom, with arcades and coin-operated machines being found at every corner, a new, more advanced, more high-tech version of these amusements had to break through, had to offer the customer something new. Nolan Bushnell had Chuck E. Cheese, but our guest today was going bigger. He was going fancier. He was going more high-tech. He was going to be bringing us something, especially for us sci-fi nerds, that the world had never seen before. And as a Trekkie, lifelong Trekkie, when I first read about this one, oh my, I just got tinglies in my fingers. So welcome to the show, Brent. Oh crap, now I'm going to kill it. Naseath, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't kill it. Okay, good. Welcome to the show, Brent. So
thank you, Carl.
So we start off all our interviews the same way. Give me a brief rundown of your educational background. So where do you start out?
Well, when I did the whole video game thing and the first 8 years of my my life, I didn't have a degree. I started in mining engineering and geology because I grew up at my dad's gold mine, and that's what I wanted to do. But when I was in school, then I needed to support myself. I was going to Mackey School of Mines and University of Nevada. I think I was a sophomore, and I bought a carpet cleaning franchise, and I did that for a year through the summer and so forth to put myself through school. And then I sold it for like 5 times what I bought it for a few months later. And I thought, wow, this is a lot easier than carrying rocks in a sack up and down the mountain. So I'll just clean carpets. So I ended up with 12 carpet cleaning franchises, and that was over a couple of years in my early 20s. And then the whole video game thing happened, which we can talk about. And then I had to go get a job after it didn't all work out. And I was working as a project manager for a big company then, Johnson Controls, in their special services division that did software for big companies and military bases and stuff. And I had to have a degree. So I went back to school nights and got a degree in computer science.
Okay, and, very cool.
Then later in life, after my first divorce, I thought maybe I'd change careers, and I went for a master's in psychology and completed the coursework. But then after working in the industry for a year nights, I just was like, nah, I don't want to do this. Went back to tech. So
very cool.
My entire education.
Well, and that's actually an interesting pathway. So just to put this in a bit of a historical context, so when approximately what year do you buy the first carpet cleaning franchise?
So let's see, I went to school from 73 to 74 in geology, my first year of school. I went to South America for a couple of years, to Ecuador.
Where? Oh, Ecuador.
And,
cool.
Yeah, I lived in Quito, Otavalo, Loja, Guayaquil, and I spent about a year in Otavalo. It was my favorite place. That's where all my friends still are, and that's where I met my best friend. He was down there also, and we're still friends. He actually lives on our property with us. But anyway, cool. Came back and got back into school in mining engineering. And then, like I said, was going to school when I bought the franchise. And then within about a year, the franchise was giving me an income that I didn't have to work. Or I didn't have to work in carpet cleaning. So franchises, because I guess it was just after the end of the summer. So I only had the first one in Reno about 3 months. And then I bought 5 more to start with, and I moved to San Diego, and I bought the 5 in San Diego. And then I ended up buying 5 more in Orange County and Seattle and all over. But so another guy that I met down in Ecuador had a insurance business, and he said, hey, come work with me in the insurance business. And so I got an insurance license, but I never worked with him. And then he had this idea for selling hot water solar systems, and people would get tax credits on it. Now, it's hard for people to understand now. In those days, the highest tax bracket was 90%. So, once you'd made, I think the limit was like $100,000 to hit the 90% bracket. So once you'd made a $90,000 or $100,000, there was no incentive to make more money, really. So people were looking more for tax sheltered investments than for normal investments. So we got into that. And in order to sell those, because we were both in our early 20s, and nobody would talk to us because if you didn't have gray hair, I spent like the first half of my life wishing I had gray hair and the second half wishing I was young without the gray hair, right? So anyway, I came up with this idea. Oh, what happened was I forgot. So I came back from Ecuador. I was going to school, and I had to take a class in Fortran. And I'd never even heard of computers. This was, like 1976. And I know computers were around. I knew a guy who was majoring in computer science back in 73, but I didn't really know what that meant. I grew up in a little town in Northern California, about 2,000 people. And so I was pretty naive and sheltered from that, from what was really going on. So anyway, I fell in love with computers instantly. And, I get my programming assignment in my Fortran class, and those were, it was with punch cards on a DEC 10, right? And so you had to go sit down on this machine and type in and punch out these cards. And if you made a mistake, it was, you had to do the card again. And when you had it all done, you'd have like this stack, this huge stack of 200 or 300 cards. And then you'd go put it in the queue, and it would get run through the DEC 10, and then you'd get this printout of the results. Well, I would stay up all night until I could get that thing to run, the first day of the assignment, even though it wasn't due for a week or two. It just captivated me. I was obsessed with it. So I wanted a computer. And Atari, when I was at college, they had these video games where I think they had a very early version. It was I don't remember what it was, but the one I remember was a tank. And 8 people could play at a time, 2 people on each side, and you had these little colored tanks running around. Man, I loved that. I spent all the money I could on that thing. So as soon as Atari came out with theirs and it had a tank game, first thing I did was buy it, even though it cost me like 2 months rent for my apartment. And so I loved that. And then so I was looking for a way to be able to afford a computer, but they were expensive. And this was pre-IBM. I don't remember when IBM came out, like 1982?
82 is the first PC.
This was like 1978. So wow. When we started this, so the computers at the time, the latest technology was with the CPM operating system. And so we were going to sell these tax sheltered investments. And I said, well, let's get this computer. It cost $11,000, and it had 2 floppy disks, 2 7-inch floppy disks that held 1K each. No, held 100K each. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
2 floppy disks that held 100K each with the ASCII terminal, and that was like $7,000. And that would be like $25,000 now, right?
Hmm.
And then it had a neck spin writer that was like a typewriter, but was computer controlled also, and it was like 4,000. So with that, we could produce typewritten letters that looked like somebody personally typed them, addressed to people, and they would get this and think that it was a personal letter. There was some computer mailing going on, but it was all with a little dot printing, and it looked really phony, and it was worded stupid. And so I bought a mailing list of 21,000 tax preparers and tax attorneys across the U.S. and put all those names um, into the little computer. And then I wrote a program in BASIC that would print out their name on the letter and on an envelope. The next spin writer, you could insert envelopes. It had an envelope feed actually, and so we sent all these out, and we got like 1,200 respondents.
Wow.
Yeah, and then out of those 1,200, I think we ended up selling like 300 systems in the last few months of the year, and it was like a couple of $100,000 of income to us, and which was a lot of money. So
I was about to say that's late 70s money. It still had some value.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so we did that business for about a year, and the next year,
I got to ask, just out of curiosity, how are you doing the manufacturing of the solar panels back then?
we weren't. We were just salespeople for
Okay.
this other company that was doing it. And,
Okay. Okay.
and in fact, now that I remember about it, yeah, I think we sold 21 or 24 systems the first year, and um, I think we made like 50 or 60,000. That was it. And then the second year, we we kind of honed in on how to do it, and that's when we got all these people, and then that's when we sold a bunch, and we gave them almost all of the sales commission that we were getting, and we sold a whole bunch of systems, but we still made a couple $100,000 each. So, but then what happened was the the company that was manufacturing the panels, they had sold so many at the end of the year that they didn't have all of them in stock. And that was
Oh,
one of our big questions, because we were pretty, we'd studied a lot about tax law and everything before we got into this. And we knew that they had to have the systems, and they had to even go into place and be in service. So we went and talked to them, and they showed us all these systems in service, and they showed us the warehouse with other systems in it. So it looked legit, but we didn't know that they had sold like 10 times more than they told us they had sold. And so then the
oh,
IRS came down on the whole thing, and they thought we were in cahoots with them because we had an office across the hallway from them, and because it was convenient. And so then, fortunately for us, and they also had backdated a bunch of contracts that they got in after the first of the year.
that'll
So
get you into trouble.
yeah,
That's definitely not a good thing.
no. So fortunately for us, we had got a bunch of sales after the first of the year too, but we stamped them, not rejected, that it was too late. We put the date on it that we received it. We included a cover letter that, sorry, it's after the first of the year. It's against the law. We can't accept this. And but still, like one of my biggest memories from that is being called into a uh, uh, a jury panel. I I forget what you call the jury, where
A
there's
grand jury?
a grand jury. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got called into grand jury, and you can't have your attorney with you. I mean, I'm like in my mid 20s, right? And here I go in there, and I'm getting grilled by these, knowledgeable attorneys with all these people in the room, and it was pretty scary and intimidating. But what happened was, since we had, rejected them, and since we had checked it out and we documented everything and kept all the records, we didn't break the law. So we didn't get charged with anything. But it meant that we were out of business. We
Mm.
didn't have anything to sell. So, and as part of that, so that's that year. When we sold all of those, we were really busy. So we had four other people working there. And so in order to have a computer terminal for all of us, they had come out with our first computer for all you technophiles out there was an Altos.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then they came out with an Alpha Micro that could have multiple users. So we bought an Alpha Micro, and with 4 user partitions, and we had 4 ASCII terminals and a hard disk. The hard disk was about the size of a garbage compactor, if they still have those these days. I mean, it was like 3 feet long, 2 feet high, and 18 inches wide. And it had one 5 megabyte fixed platter and one 5 megabyte removable platter, so you could do backups. And the thing would crash like once a year. And so, you had to do religious backups. And when it crashed, it was like, $600 to get the thing repaired. It was horrendous.
Yeah.
So when they came out, after the IBM PC came out, I'm just kind of jumping ahead, and then after a year or so, when they came out with a 5 megabyte drive that, you could hold in your hand for a few $100s, it just was miraculous to me. But anyway, on that old Alpha Micro, I had an idea while we were doing the tax sheltered investments. I had an idea for a Star Trek video or Star Trek game. I guess it'd be a video game. It was on a screen. But I also was a Star Trek freak. So I think I was 9. Didn't Star Trek come out in like 64?
Now I almost want to say it may have been a little bit later. Star Trek. I always get it confused with Batman, to be honest with you, because they're both coming out in the 60s. Let's see. Original series debuts in 66. So same year as Batman, 66. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was 60 years ago for me. So it's hard to remember exactly what was going on. Course. But okay, so in 66 I was 11, and that show revolutionized sci-fi, right? I mean, I just couldn't all I could stand was to wait the week for the next episode. It was just amazing. And Spock was my hero, and I just loved it. So anyway, I was a Trekkie, full-blown Trekkie. So I designed this Star Trek game. And the way it worked was, and it had to be on your ASCII terminal. But the ASCII character set had little lines, so you could draw boxes, but you could only put characters in those boxes. So I designed a 4-player game where one person was the Romulans, one was the Klingons, one was the Vulcans, and one was the Federation. And then their ships, and so there were 4 different groups, and each player had 3 ships. So I designed 12 ships, and the center with 3 characters. So the center ASCII character was something, and then it had 2 things on each side that matched, and I came up with the 12 ships. And then the way it worked is you had the universe that was a 10 by 10 grid, and it was divided into parsecs. And then you could go into a parsec, and it was a 10 by 10 grid. So, you had 10,000 possible locations you could be at. And if you were in a parsec, you could see stars, they were little asterisks, and you could see the other ships if they were there. And then you couldn't do a long range scan outside of the parsec, but you could see what was in the parsec. And then you would, and you had to do this typing, right? You have to put in the location that you were firing at, and then whether you were firing photon torpedoes or phasers, and you only had so many photon torpedoes, and your phasers power, would deplete. And you had I think there were 10 systems. So there was life support and communications and all these different things. And when you got, and there were shields, of course, and then you had so much power in your shields. So when you got hit by a phaser, a photon torpedo with your shields, it would absorb all the firepower points that it was getting hit with until it went down. And then it would just randomly select the other systems and randomly deduct the points, right? And
Makes sense.
And if life support went out, you had to rapidly, reconfigure. And then you could also, so that at the beginning of the game, you couldn't see it where it was, but you would put your 3 ships anywhere that you wanted in the universe. And then you could transport to any one of those other ships if your ship got destroyed. So you would battle it out until the last man standing. Yeah. And sometimes we would play, like Federation and Vulcan against the other 2. But that was so much fun, that game, that we stayed every night after work. Our wives would actually bring us dinner, and we would tell them that we were working. And as soon as they would leave, we would play that game from like 7 o'clock at night till 11 o'clock every night. We were just like obsessed with it. It was so much fun. And so when our business went down, because these guys went under, then I said, well, let's put this into a real game and sell it. And the state of the art of video games at the time was Pac-Man and Missile Command. So they were single player games. And, we did a lot of research when we thought of this on the market itself. And all of these games were reaction-only games, right? The better reaction time you had, then you could survive longer and get more points. That was it. It was like pinball, only it was electronic. And so I said, well, what if we had a strategic game? Because that's what we've been doing, a strategy. What if we just duplicated this, had a strategic game, and you could play against other people? So what if we developed an actual simulator? So we bought the rights to the first Star Trek movie from, we licensed the rights. That's fairer. We licensed the rights from Paramount Studios for the first Star Trek movie that was out. And that way we got pictures of the ship going into warp drive, and we got, pictures of stars and that kind of stuff. And then the idea was to have overlaid graphics, and you've seen the picture of the game console, right?
Yeah. And it very much feels like the first movie, that very clean white look with multiple screens. You had how many screens on each console?
Yeah, so the top screen, it was a 19-inch color monitor and 19-inch NTSC color monitor, and that's the screen that had the actual film footage with overlaid graphics. So you could, if you fired phasers, you'd see the phasers fire over the top of the and it also gave us the other ships. So
okay, and we're probably going to get really deep into the weeds here. Now, the overlay of the graphics. Now, I guess we have to go back. So the video footage is coming off a Laserdisc, right?
Yeah, and the Laserdisc itself. Do you want to ask your question, or you want me to tell you about the Laserdisc?
Well, please. Give me all. I want all the details, everything you can remember about this. Lay it on me. The people who are listening to this, trust me, that's what they want. So it's all good.
Okay. So, I was doing all this technical research to find out what was available, what was the latest technology, which turned out also to be the bleeding edge technology, which I'd never done a technical project like that, so I didn't realize the risks. And I mean, everything, the sky was the limit then, I think I'm the same age as Steve Jobs. So, I mean, in those days it was, programming was like you go off in a closet for 3 months and you come out with something and everybody goes, ooh, that's wonderful. So anyway, and I studied a lot of project management because we we ended up raising $1.4 million to do the project, which would be like, $5 or $6 million now. And I wanted to make sure that we put it to good use and we didn't blow it. And it was funny that at the time, all the latest processes for managing projects were from World War II, building submarines, right? Critical path management and all of that.
Well, and that's actually something I also want to get deep in with you, because I know that was something that we talked about a little bit beforehand. Now, I got to go back, the funding. So just to get the chronology of this right. So you've got the game that you've made basically as a side project while you're running the previous company.
Right.
And
so then we start putting together a plan and a design for the new system and to see what's possible. This is before the funding. Okay. So when we're doing that, Laserdisc video was a brand new thing. Sony was the only one that had a player, and it wasn't computer controlled, so it didn't do us any good. And then Panasonic, right in the middle of our project, came out with, or right at the beginning of it, came out with a new video player that could have computer direction, where it would send you to a specific location on the disc. But you had to cut the disc especially for that, of course.
Yeah.
Let me think here for a second. The disc was a 12-inch disc, and it held about 1 hour or less of video. So in order to have a normal movie, you had to have two of the discs that you put in. And I don't remember how much the disc players cost, but anyway.
They were expensive.
Yeah, I checked all around and I could only find one company, a company called Perceptronics, who had ever done control of a laser disc with
computers.
Yeah, with the company that makes it. What was the company?
Panasonic.
Yeah, Panasonic. So we went to them and said, can you do this for us? And they said yes. So then I designed the whole game with this 19-inch NTSC monitor up at the top and three 12-inch color monitors at the bottom. And the 12-inch were computer monitors only, but they were in color. And the middle, I don't remember, I think the middle one was navigation, and the one on the left was your ship readout of all your systems. So when your power levels would go down, that would go down. And then the one on the right, I think, I don't remember, but anyway, there were three of them with your instruments. And what was unique about it was that to manufacture one of those kiosks, or whatever you want to call it, one of the game consoles with everything in it, cost about $5,500 each. And at the time, so that was without our markup. That was raw cost. So then the question is, well, how do we market this? Now that's
including the laser disc and everything?
Yeah.
Actually, that's not bad considering how much a normal coin-op machine cost around that time.
Yeah, but if you think about it, it was a fiberglass shell that we were making. Another kind of cool thing is it had a video camera up here at the top of it that you could hit a button on the console and it would be a ship-to-ship communication, and you could talk to any of the other players.
Nice.
And so anyway, there were the monitors. They were a couple $100 a piece. There were the boards that went in it, and then there was the video game, or the Panasonic player. And the player didn't exist in the console. It existed in a control room in the franchise counter, behind the counter. So here's the business plan that we came up with that made it work, was the franchise model. And I named the system Simutron because, I mean, it sounds kind of dorky now, but it was a cool name back in the day, and they were simulators, and Tron was the latest thing, right? So I named it Simutron, and we called it the Simutron Simulator System. And the name of the company was Simutron, and the tournament centers, or where you go to play, was Simutron Tournament Center. And the idea is that you would pay for 15-minute increments rather than a few minutes, and it would just be 15 minutes straight. And then we would have tournaments, and you could go in for individual play, and it would be 8 different players could play at a time. And then I think that turned into 16 at the end when they built the token ring network. And there were no token ring networks, so the engineer designed that. And it was all based on the Z80 chip. Even though the 8086 was the newest chip, it was based on the Z80. And in the tournament center, you would come in, there would be I sent you the picture. There was we did a prototype tournament center, and you'd come in, there was a counter with all the, where you'd put in your money, and there was a wall behind it with the 8 Laserdisc players. And then you'd go through an airlock door like Star Trek, and it had a whoosh and everything, and a door that, it would go whoosh, and then you would walk through, and then there was all this lighting that would go down this hallway, and you'd go into this dark space where the consoles were set up, and all the lighting would go down into the top of the console, so it was like being energized.
Nice.
So that was fun. And another cool thing was we got the chairs, and you can see them in the picture. The chairs were designed by Recaro, and that's the big custom car chair manufacturer. And they built them for us, and they had 12-inch woofer speakers in the base and stereo speakers in the headset right behind. So not only did you get these great sounds and everything, but when you went into warp drive or you got hit with a phaser or a photon torpedo, you'd get this rumbling sound that would shake the whole chair from the bottom, like or like whoosh as you take off into warp drive. It really gave it a 3D real life experience. I mean, it was fun.
Now, I do have to ask. You're setting up the company. You're basically planning out the business plan. Do you guys build an entire prototype of this before you go looking for investors, or how far is the tech when you decide to go and seek funding?
We had no technology. We just had the design, and a friend of mine, Dave Jenkins, was the marketing vice president, and he put together an excellent brochure. I could send you a copy of that too if you wanted.
Oh, definitely. Yes, please.
He put together a brochure that we used to raise the money. And so my partner, Grant Hallstrom, was the one that raised the money. I didn't really help with that. I was involved, I worked the technology side, he raised the money, and Dave did the marketing. The reason that it worked economically was that we would sell franchises, and the franchisee could charge the 15-minute increments. So they would pay for the equipment up front, and then they would get the ongoing revenues. So it was a good deal. And what made it really good was that all these people who had video game stores where you go in and play, their biggest problem was that, as I remember, Pac-Man and Missile Command and those cost $2,600 for the kiosk, and they could become obsolete in a matter of months. So you'd put out $2,600, and then everybody would come in, and if it was too easy, you're out $2,600 right away, and you could, there was some resale value, but not a whole lot. And then you had to constantly be buying new games, and if they were too difficult, then nobody would buy them. So, would pay for them to play. Yeah. So where you had this idea of tournament and, playing with other people, that meant that it was unlimited strategy, and, you'd never get tired of playing it. But then the other thing was the idea that I came up with, that you would, instead of having hard buttons, actually, I think my uncle came up with this, to give everybody proper credit, but instead of having buttons on the panel, you had touch sensitive overlays, and we could produce those overlays and just set them down on it and it would make, and underneath the overlay was all the actual keys. And so you could change the game just by putting a new overlay down and a new 12-inch disc in the player. And so the idea was that once we were distributing selling the franchises, we would come up with a new game. And the second one we were going to do was a detective mystery game. And so if you came in and you wanted to play that, you'd go up to the counter, they would put that 12-inch disc in your player and hand you the appropriate keyboard overlay, and you would go in and set that down, and then you'd play that game. So that's how it became, the equipment then didn't become obsolete, and therefore with that and the fact that the game never became obsolete and you could only add more games, and to add more games, all the software was right on the 12-inch disc, it became a really economical, viable enterprise. So much so
now,
that
when you say that the software was on the disk, you're not talking about the program code that the Z80 was processing. You're just talking about the imagery data, or were you also storing the Z80 code?
I'm talking about the program code that was running the game.
Oh, really? Okay. Now, that's interesting, because around this time, there's a couple of attempts to use Laserdisc as a game medium. But mostly it's just you have a program that's independent of the Laserdisc running on a CPU, like a home computer, and it's sending calls to the Laserdisc player to play certain scenes at certain times. So you're actually storing the data on the disc.
No.
And
I'm storing the program code on the disc.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
And when you put the disc in, all that program code loads into the computer memory, and it's run from the computer from then on. So it was just a storage medium for the code. Okay. But that way we didn't have to distribute the code independently.
Okay. And I have to admit, I'm not that up on the specifics of the Laserdisc format. Could Laserdisc natively hold digital data like that, or were you storing the data basically like an audio file and playing it off as if it was a cassette tape?
No, it was digital data.
It was digital data. Okay, cool. Okay. So then it would have just been one disc changes everything. That's a pretty cool setup.
Yeah. So we let's see, Chuck E. Cheese and their competitor Showbiz Pizza were both very interested in it for their pizza parlors, and Showbiz Pizza had the highest bid, so they gave us a purchase order for 50 franchises with 10 units in each one. And that first purchase order, if we could have delivered it, would have made me personally $10 million. So I thought I was rich, man. I thought that was it. I'm a millionaire the rest of my life, and $10 million in those days was a lot of money. So now, I thought it was great.
Now, to put it into context, so you get you wrote the original program in 77, 78.
Yeah.
Right? Now, how long does it take to basically build up the plan, put the brochure together, get the funding, build a prototype, and then get the interest of Chuck E. Cheese? When is Chuck E. Cheese putting in this order? 81, 82?
Yeah, so I got my first computer in 78. So I think the second computer was in 79. So I, of course, I'm roughly remembering this.
Of course. But yeah. No, it's just about
I'm pretty sure about the 78. But so, yeah, it was like 79 when the other business collapsed. So it would have been like 80 when we raised the money. And I don't remember when it went under, like the middle of 81 or 82, something like that. Probably 82.
Okay. So the other business collapse, was that
okay,
purely independent of what was going on here, or?
I'm sorry, one more question.
The other business, when it collapses, is it purely unrelated issues with the other one, or what? Is there a specific story for why the other business collapsed?
Well, you mean the hot water solar panel business?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. You're right. Sorry. For some reason, I still had the vacuum cleaners in the back of my head. That franchise business is gone. So yeah. So okay. So it collapses.
The franchises. Sorry. I still ran the franchises on the side for another 5 years.
Okay.
Until all the amortization was used up, and then I sold them to the managers that I had managing them.
Okay. Cool. So okay. So yeah. So, you guys are now pitching this. You've built the prototypes. How many prototypes did you build to show off?
But we didn't have any prototypes when we raised the money.
No, not when you raise the money, but when you're, for example, showing them to Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz. What are you showing them exactly?
We built the prototype tournament center that I sent you that picture of.
Oh, okay. So the whole center was actually fully functional. The whole center
with eight terminals in it, with 8 game systems.
Okay.
And had the 8 laser discs behind the counter, and the whole thing was operational from that perspective. But the software was being run at Perceptronics, and so they, I was naive. I hadn't run a technical project before, so we went and they said, "Yeah, this is working. This is working." Okay, we would pay them, and 2 weeks later, this is working. But then I started wondering if it was really working. Well, the first 70% was things that supposedly we couldn't see because it was just software and these messages would come up saying, this is happening, on the terminal, but we couldn't see anything. And so then when the project manager, I think his name was Scott Ellison, he was the project manager and the hardware engineer, and then he hired another guy from the UK, I think Michael Moore, somebody like that was a software guy. And so Scott, I guess he was a good hardware engineer, but I never actually saw anything operational. Oh. And then the only thing that I saw was static images of planets made by Michael Moore. So Scott had this idea that, well, instead of just having this simple battle game like you're talking about, let's let them fly around the universe and they can explore planets and they can discover things, and it'll be, this really great experience. And I said, it sounds all good, but let's build the other one first. Well, I didn't have a control over him, no matter what I said. They were building, all these images of planets, and I saw these nice images of planets, but nothing ever worked. And so then he said, okay, it's all, and I said, hey, the investors are really anxious here. We have to see this thing working in the prototype center. And so he was like, okay, it's ready and we'll bring it down. So we announced it to the investors. We had all these people here. Scott came down the day before, started setting it up. It never ran. All the investors show up the next morning. We're sitting there still waiting for it to run. Finally, everybody just goes home. I get up and I apologize to everybody. And that's when, I went to him. We'd already given him all the money. I went to the Gersh Weltman, the president of Perceptronics, and said, you guys got to produce this or we're going to sue you. And he said, his exact quote, if you weren't so young and naive, you would have sued us 6 months ago.
Oh.
So then we sued him. And then during the lawsuit, his secretary, who liked us, because we made friends with her, actually sent us a copy of a contract that they got with DARPA, the military government military, for it was $104 million, but the first stage was $52 million. And it said right in the contract, because the government wanted to make sure, using the Simutron simulator system.
Oh my God.
But I don't think they ever delivered on that either, because I think they were in over their heads and it was just promises. And, I don't think, like, Scott came across to me as a sincere guy, but I don't think he was capable of delivering it. And it probably, knowing what I know now about teams and technology, would have probably taken a team of 10 guys to deliver that in the year that they promised it. And a good project manager managing them and sticking to the original small scope of the project. And what happened in the end was we sued him, and because we insisted on a purchase order and not an R&D contract, then if you don't deliver on a purchase order, that's fraud. So we got a judgment of $1.4 million, and that was that.
And was there anything left of the company in order to be able to actually collect on that 1.4 million judgment?
Oh yeah, Perceptronics. Well, and in their, it's funny that in their court testimony.
Appeal. Oh, their court testimony. Yeah.
Yeah. Deposition. That's what I'm looking for. In their deposition, they testified that if they had to pay more than 1.4 million, because we were suing them for, I don't remember, a lot more than that, 10 or 20 million or something. Anyway, they said if they had to pay more than that, because it was in California with punitive damages. So we were suing for punitive damages. So they testified that if they had to pay more than that, they would be bankrupt, and that all these 100 more people would be out of work, and that would be a really bad thing. So the judge limited it to the 1.4 million, and it over 2 years, quarterly payments over 2 years with no interest. It turned out that the insurance company who was involved in the whole thing and who put up the attorneys for defense paid the whole thing. And so, I mean, the whole thing was like a lie from the beginning, but.
But that sucks.
Yeah, I don't know what we would have done at that point anyway.
So I do have to go back here because there's an important element that we haven't discussed yet, or we've mentioned it. Now, this was going to be using footage from the Star Trek The Motion Picture.
Yeah, and we did have the video disc cut. We got the footage and we had the video disc cut. Perceptronics did do that. And we could search, put it in and the computer would search and find the footage. So, that was early on in the project and we thought that was great. And one of the designers from Perceptronics also had the connection with Recaro and had the seats designed and all of that. So they did a good job on that. Now,
what was the process like approaching Paramount to be able to get that footage? I mean, what does that process look like? Because they cut a deal. They had a couple of deals running for games based off of Wrath of Khan around the same time. So how early in the process do you approach them, and what was that negotiation like?
So from the other business that went under, my partner and I had a couple of $100,000, and we used that to get the game started. So we used that to license the rights to Star Trek and to pay Perceptronics to get started and all that kind of stuff before we raised the money. So that was the seed capital from our own pockets, which is probably what you were asking before, is how did we get that going? I didn't put two and two together, but.
Well, it's how do you get that going? Number one, from a financing standpoint, but also number two, you're deciding, okay, we've done this as Star Trek. I mean, it's kind of a big swing to say, yeah, we're just going to get the Star Trek license instead of, yeah, it'll look kind of like Star Trek, but it's not really Star Trek. So, I mean, how do you just call up Paramount and like, hey, I want to make a video game off of this. Who do I have to talk to?
The licensing department.
Okay.
So you call the licensing department, and we did this, and we spent our money doing it. So we went there. We met with the licensing department at Paramount Studios in Los Angeles or wherever that is, Beverly Hills or wherever. And so we met with them. They took us to lunch, and we ate with the Mork and Mindy cast. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Pam Dauber
Robin
and
Williams.
Yeah, and the other guy there that was, and Jonathan Winters was there. So he was like a total nutcase, and he went on for like hours after lunch, telling one joke after another, just a monologue on and on and on. As long as you give him attention, man, he was on. And Pam Dauber was just kind of rolling her eyes like, I hate doing this. I don't want to know you people. Get out of my life. And they were filming a Mork and Mindy scene that we were standing in the crowd, the one where the car goes up on two wheels and everything. So that was kind of fun, the episode. Anyway, on the phone they'd said, yeah, we'll do this for $25,000, and then a certain percentage of the revenues from playing the game. Of course, when we got there and they found out that it was a double bind, that we had to have it, then the price immediately went up to $50,000. But we paid the $50,000, and then we, raised the money from the investors. So that's how we licensed it. They gave us they sent over these reels of tape, and then Perceptronics took the reels of tape and had the video game cut, the Laserdisc cut. And they had done a Laserdisc previous to that of riding a bike. So that's their one previous project. And you sat on an actual bike, a exercise bike, and then you had this big screen TV in front of you, a 60-inch screen, and it showed going up and down hills and stuff. And the faster you pedaled, the faster it would go, and it would show different scenes that you could pick. And that was their experience with it. And they sold that on I forget the real expensive place, like catalog that sold expensive stuff. Anyway, I think it was $10,000.
Oh, the Sharper Image.
Sharper Image. They sold it on Sharper Image, and they were $10,000 for that bike and big screen TV and they actually sold two of them.
Okay, so now, but you didn't get carte blanche to use the entire film. You were limited to only special effects shots or non-primary cast member shots. How did that work?
No, we got the actual whole film, but we went through that and we pulled out the footage that we could actually use, and then we had the disc cut with that. So I think it was about 30 minutes of film footage that we were using.
Okay, but the contract said you weren't allowed to show any of the primary cast members, right?
Probably. I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just read it in one of the articles. That's why I was from the time. That's why I was.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they immediately turned around and contacted Sega and sold video game rights to Sega for a vector video game.
Yeah. And
before that, Sega didn't have any plans and everything. I mean, that was all motivated by us going to them and saying, here's this whole new video game. I mean, when we went to them, we said, here's this whole new video game craze. And they're like, what? Video games? What are those? So we had to educate them to get them to license us. And then when we did that, then they were like, hey, all right, well, let's go to the big company that's making the games, and which they did.
Yeah, and it was weird because we talked about, I believe it was a Play Meter magazine, the same issue that was showing off your your center and the game concept and the details of it, was also talking about how Nichelle Nichols and George Takei had been sent out by Sega to arcades all over the place to promote the new Star Trek game that they
Yeah,
had
but the
released.
Star Trek game wasn't ready yet. That was a fake. That was
Oh,
just
really?
yeah, that was just for advertising. As I recall, they
Yeah.
announced it and they didn't have it done yet, the software done yet,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and it took them a while to get it done, as I recall.
Gotcha.
I'm,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, they had two games in planning. One that was based off some weird ephemeral CGI or something that was in the film, and then the other one, which was the vector game in the arcades. But
right.
yeah, it's nuts. So okay, so you had the center. You don't actually have any functioning software to use in the center.
Correct.
You have orders from Chuck E. Cheese to deliver a ton of these units
From Showbiz Pizza.
from Showbiz.
Right.
Sorry. And you've got the investors now very, very ticked off. You've had to sue. You get you get your judgment against them for damages. I'm guessing that money, a huge chunk of that, is going to go back to the investors. I mean, if not all of it. You had 5 million from the investors.
We had 1.4 million.
Okay.
A third of it went to the attorneys. A third of it went to the investors, and then my partner and I got a third of it. And that was our agreement with the investors up front. But I took all of my part of that and paid back all the investors that I knew, so they got 100% back.
Okay, that's
I felt it was only fair.
Yeah.
Then I went out and got a job.
And what was that job?
That was the job as a project manager at Johnson Controls.
Okay. And I think this is where the project management issue, I think, is something that we could discuss, because you mentioned already that project management theory hadn't really advanced since World War II at this point. But it's my understanding in the 1980s that begins to change.
Yeah. So what I discovered, okay, so there was no internet, right? So how did you learn something? I mean, I've been an avid learner my entire life, and my first wife in her divorce papers said that I had changed careers a whole bunch of times, right? It was because I was trying to make more money each time, and because it caught my interest. So each time that something would catch your interest, what would you do? There was you could get a college degree in it, which took a long time and cost a bunch of money, or you'd go to the library and you'd pull out the card catalog and you'd read every book in the library and every magazine. So that's how I learned project management. And then when I answered this ad for project manager at Johnson Controls and I got the job, I found out that the other guys there who were in their 50s and 60s, I think there were 3 other project managers, 2 of them in their 50s and 60s, and one was 10 or 15 years older than me. And they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, they all managed. I hope they don't listen to this. I'm sorry, guys, but they managed by walking around and worrying about it and figuring out what to do next. And so they each managed one project, and sometimes they had a minor project that was old that they had to maintain. They were all smart guys. I mean, there's no question about that. And they were all programmers, and this was in Fortran, and they knew Fortran much better than I did. And then later it became C, but they were really, technical geniuses, these guys. But I recognized right away, and I tried to help everybody learn how to actually manage a project. And then I had this idea. So you'd fill out your timesheet in, by hand, and this was in Kearny Mesa and San Diego, and then they'd send them back to headquarters in the Mideast. And so I thought, well, the biggest problem is that I always piss everybody off where I work because I always come up with these ideas, why can't we really do this, guys? And people don't want change. I mean, it upset me when I was young, but I've learned it my entire career. I've been a change agent my entire life. And unfortunately, I've always been about 30 years ahead of the time and ahead of the technology. When I finally figured that out, then I reverted to like the quality industry. We can talk about that in a little while. But my entire life, I've tried to improve processes and companies and technology and make things faster, better, cheaper. And I found out that nobody wants that in a company because they're getting paid to keep things the way they're getting paid the way things are right now. Why would you ever risk your career to try to make something better when there's no upside to it? I'm already getting paid. It's not going to reward me if it goes better. It can only hurt me if it goes worse. So I understand that, but I don't respect it. I believe that you do the best that you can on everything, and that if it can be better, make it better. And if it doesn't quite work, fix it. That's why I got into the Six Sigma movement. Continual improvement, and that really fit my personality. And I finally became a consultant later, and would go around for companies that were going under and help save their butts and pull them out, or fix whatever project was failing, and that became kind of my forte. But I didn't play well in the sandbox with everybody else because I'd always ask embarrassing questions like, why are we doing that? That doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing that and prioritizing the owners and the executives making money over the employees and the customers? I mean, shouldn't we really be working towards pleasing the customers, guys? I mean, look, if we please them, they'll buy more, we'll make more money. No. So I was like persona non grata.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's a lesson that you have to learn, I guess, is that people don't like change. But anyway,
Very true.
I'm working at Johnson Controls, and I realized that the problem that you had coming up with a good project plan. Oh, and all their bids would take a couple of months. I mean, the smallest bid would take a couple of weeks of full-time effort by a project manager, and they would each time go around to the pool of programmers and designers and say, how long do you think this would take? And they would come up with tasks, but then within a week, of course, the project plan is obsolete anyway, and then it would never get updated after that. That's why I said they would kind of walk around.
Wow.
And they had no, updating it didn't really make sense with the changes going on all the time. They didn't have time for it, I guess they felt. But this was right at the beginning of PCs, and there was no PC software out there. So there was no project planning software on the PC like Microsoft Project or anything like that. So I came up with the idea of a Microsoft Project software system on the mainframe computer at Johnson Controls. And so I went to him and I said, look, if we could do this, here's the benefits. We can, what we'll do is we'll take the timesheets, and instead of filling them out by hand, we will fill them out on the computer. And then what we'll do is you can define a task, and you can, when you plan your project, you'll define the tasks that are for the project. You'll put the cost code in at the task level. And then when somebody works on your project, they will see the task that they're assigned to, and they'll only be able to put time in on that task, specific time. So you'll know exactly how much time is being spent on your task. And then we will save that in a database. And in the future, when we go to bid, about 80% of the tasks are the same for every project. So we can just say, it's this type of project, bang, and we've got 80% of our tasks. And then we only have to do 20% that are the custom tasks for that project. But most of those are similar enough that we can, pull in other ones and then fix them. And so it took so anyway, I went to management and I proposed that. My boss was the head of the special services operations. No, that's not true. He was head of project management, and then above him was the special services operations. Anyway, I went to my boss and I said, let's do this. And you're paying me anyway. Let's do it. No, we don't want to pay for that. But look at all these benefits that we'll get. No, we don't want to pay for that. Just do your job. So I did it anyway. I spent lunch hours and evenings and stuff, and I did this whole system. And then one of the other project managers got excited about it. So he convinced everybody to put their timesheets in online. And once they realized that they didn't have to remember everything, it was much faster to just go in and put your numbers in each week and maybe add a new task than it was, fill it out by hand each week. And then we still had to actually print them out and send a paper copy to Milwaukee.
Why?
Because nobody wanted to accept that computer data.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Anyway, so what happened in real time was all of a sudden, and the projects would go over, just like every other software project, would go over from 200 to 400%. Why? Because they're not based on real data, and because they're use the most optimistic numbers possible, because it's easier to get to win a bid at a lower price and then up the price later and come up with a good enough excuse with scope creep that you can do it, and eventually come up with it. Like for this book that I just wrote and published, In Politics Now, one of the examples in there was I won't bore you with all the details, but anyway, it was supposed to be delivered in 10 years. It's now 20 years later, many times the original cost. They still don't have a working aircraft, even though they're selling them with like a 60% reliability factor on the engines, which is way below acceptability, and with like something like 6 major flaws. One of them can cause death. Another one can ruin the production line, all this kind of stuff. And with this high engine failure rate, we can't even get engines because they're selling them around the world, and the other countries are bidding higher amounts for the engines. So anyway, that's the nature of the software industry. But back to Johnson Controls and this system, my boss was kind enough. He became the head of the whole division at that point, and he was kind enough to call it Brent Stone, and
Nice.
And we could do a new bid within 3 days, and all of the bids started coming in on time and under budget. And everybody's like, wow, this is miraculous. No, it isn't. We're just basing it on real data that we've had years of experience. Let's put it in. And I worked there for 4.5 years. And so, we used that system for at least 2 or 2.5 years. And it worked great. And then within 2 months after I left, Johnson Controls, they scrapped the system and went back to doing everything manually.
Oh, no.
I was just flabbergasted. Why in the world would you do that? But, nobody wanted to be bothered using it. It's like,
Yeah.
But it's simpler and faster. You don't have to spend weeks. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't understand it myself, but that's what happened. So that just kind of blew me away.
Yeah, that just sounds so sad because, you see it in a whole bunch of industries that move away from analog systems to computer systems.
Right.
Throughout those years, especially in the 80s, before people coming into the company had hands-on personal experience with the machines. That really was a very, very difficult transition for most because they just didn't understand it. The interfaces, this is all pre-Windows, I'm guessing. So
oh yeah,
the interface is just loading a program in DOS is not what you would call intuitive. So yeah, it's
Well, we
it's a
didn't even
shame.
have DOS computers because, like when we wanted to buy PCs, the answer was, wait. In fact, the manager of the division said, I think it was like 1.4, 1.6. We have 1.6 CRTs per employee now. Why would we need to add another one? Well, because these computers have software on them that's going to automate all of the things that we do, and we can do it a lot faster. Yeah, but a CRT is a CRT.
Oh, Jesus Christ
But,
almighty.
I never related it until now. Like, I guess I have to be in my late 60s to relate to these guys that now I look at people with making videos and, the social media stuff. And I mean, I'm doing my best to learn it and try to figure out how it works. But I didn't grow up with social media with a phone in my face. And so to me, it's still kind of something new technology that I'm not quite used to. And that was the same thing with these guys, right? But I was young, and to me, it was the latest, greatest, marvelous thing. Of course, you have to do it. But I
Yeah.
guess you don't if you're 30 years older.
I mean, in Japan, it took them years and years and years into the 80s to get people to use computers as opposed to abacuses. So, yeah, no,
But
it's one of
abacuses are
those.
so cool.
I mean, there's something about it. I mean, but yeah, it's not an efficient system once you get into big data sets.
Well, when I went to college, um, we used slide rules, and I had a
Mm.
circular slide rule. It was, I don't know how big it was, but it was like this big around, and because it would give you more circumference, so you get more
Mm.
accuracy. And I was majoring in mining engineering, doing all these calculations on a slide rule. And then a friend of mine showed me this brand new HP computer, programmable computer, and he was so excited about it. And it had 50 programmable steps in it that would do basic calculations. Man, I grabbed that thing, and the first thing I did was a lunar landing program where you would put in numbers, and you had to burn the right amount to keep from crashing into the planet. So I I just thought the whole thing was made for gaming from the very beginning, even calculators.
Everything. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Uh, it's just anything that can give you feedback is just begging to become a game. It really is.
exactly.
But okay, so after you leave there, where do you go? What's the next stop?
So my first stop was General Dynamics, and I got hired. So General Dynamics had over 100,000 employees, and they had 46 employees in this special department that solved the impossible problems. And I got hired in there as the 46th employee, and it was at a secret facility, and I had to get a clearance, all that kind of stuff. And I'm trying to think what I can say about it. Anyway, I worked there for 3 months, and they had computers, but they were inside the vault. And so everything that you did outside the vault, you had to write down on paper, and then they would hand it off to somebody inside the vault who would type it in and then tell you the result. And I was like, what the hell? Anyway,
Wow.
my I I had got my degree in computer science, going to school nights and weekends when I was at Johnson Controls, and I loved challenges. My compiler class was my favorite class, and I've used parsing and that ever since. I've written all kinds of programs using that technology. Um, so one of the things that I learned at the time, what was the latest, greatest thing for the government, was Ada programming.
Okay.
And nobody at this place knew Ada, but they were trying to learn it and get used to it. And they were trying to figure out how to design with it. Oh, the other thing I did at Johnson Controls that was critical for my development and the rest of my life was I learned functional design. So Tom DeMarco wrote this book about functional design, and and I'll give you an example of a project I did at Johnson Controls. They got this project for the Superdome in New Orleans to control the lighting, and it had, I don't remember, 2,600 lights in the stadium that all pointed. There were like 25 that pointed to each 10-foot by 10-foot section of the stadium. So when if you had one kind of game, they turned on certain lights. If you had another kind of game, they turned on other lights. And once you turned a light on, you had to, and you turned it off again, you couldn't turn it back on for a certain amount of time because it had to cool down before it could start back up.
Okay.
And so they accepted the contract for this. And it was a 9-month contract. They had to deliver in 9 months. So this one guy, I can't think of his name right now, but he was an electronic genius. And he came up with these boards. I think our digital boards had 8 digital switches on a board. And he came up with a board with 256 digital switches on a board, right?
Wow.
Made these special boards for the controllers for all the lights, designed all those. And great guy. I wish I was still in touch with him. And anyway, after 2 months, they gave it to their most experienced project manager, who did his normal walking around for 2 months. Nothing else got done. And they came to me with 7 months left and begged me, "Will you take this project on? You're like our only hope, Obi-Wan." And I said, "I will do it under one condition. That one condition is that I have 100% control. I do what I want to do, when I want to do it, the way I want to do it, and everybody leaves me alone." And I can tell you right now, the first 2 months, I'm going to do a functional design using the DeMarco method. And the way that works, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the way it works is you map the flow of information through the system, because all software systems are information flow, right?
Yeah.
They store information, you put information in, they do something with it, they spit it back out, they take some action. So he used a process flow diagram to map it out. So you had data stores, you had entities that could put information in and get information out, and then you would, using process flow diagrams, you would map how the data would flow through the system. And then inside each process flow bubble, you mapped in structured English how that data was converted that came in to the data that would go out. And only 3 things could happen. Data would come in, new data would be added, and data would flow out, right? And it could flow out to storage or flow out to a printer or monitor. That was it. And so it was a perfect design to functionally describe what happens in a software system. And it turns out that the reason that people had such trouble understanding software is because they had no idea, concept in their head, what's going on with the software. They couldn't envision it. Like if you build a house, it's concrete. You look at a blueprint, you have a blueprint. There were no blueprints for software. You have a blueprint that you can look at and some renderings and kind of envision what that house looks like, right? And you could say, okay, that's going to work for me, but these windows are a little bit too big, and I want the door over here, and I don't want to be able to see the kitchen sink from my living room, right? But nobody could imagine that with software. So they would just say these vague general requirements, and then you'd come up with something that you thought met them and they didn't. So then they would change the requirements, and then this whole cascading thing would happen. So what functional requirements allowed you to do, functional design requirements, allowed you to functional requirements design, I guess it was called, allowed you to create this data flow diagram. And it was multi-level. So there was the top level diagram, and then each one of those bubbles cascaded into lower levels. You go down as many levels as you needed. And then you could use that to step through it with the users and say, okay, here's what the menu is going to look like. and you're going to do this. And when you do this, the software is going to do this, see? And then it'll do this and this and this. And they could go, oh, that's not going to work at all. And then they could switch it around, right? And the biggest thing it would do, though, is then they would go, oh, but I also needed to do this and this and this. Yeah, but that's not in your requirements. So then you could fix it right on paper really fast with your requirements document and see the entire scope. No more this iceberg effect where they would spec, 30% of it and think that you're going to give them 100%, and you don't even know it exists or those requirements exist. So the very first thing I did when I got these requirements from the Superdome was I did a requirements document. It took about 2 months for me to do that, and back and forth with everybody. But at the end of those 2 months, everybody actually understood what was going on. And because the whole thing was diagrammed out specifically, instead of taking a couple of months just for the design took less than a week. I mean, the design falls right out. I'm talking the structured code design for modules and everything, falls right out of the functional design. And then everybody went to work. And because we knew exactly how everything fit together, we could put like 25 programmers on it. And those 25 programmers could, knock it out in 7 months. And they delivered in 7 months. And a week after we delivered, they had a circus where they had to spotlight the different acts that went out. And part of the system was this programming language where at a screen, I did all the software myself for the color screen, but it showed a picture of the grid of the field. And with a light pen, you could say, I want this much light here, and I want this much light here for this long. And they used it to like spotlight the acts as they walked out on the field. And it all worked perfectly. And for the next 2 years after that I was in touch with them, they never had one single reported bug in that software system. Now tell me a software system that you've ever heard of that never had a bug. Why didn't they have a bug? Because the programmers knew exactly what they had to do, and the testers knew exactly what that code was supposed to do. And we used, a friend of mine was in charge of the testing department, and we both did the testing, and we used path testing on the testing at his name is Daniel Webster. Brilliant guy. He is like the third generation grandson of the Daniel Webster who wrote Webster's Dictionary. Oh, and I shared the office with him for 4.5 years at Johnson Controls. And any grammar that I have that's somewhat accurate comes from sharing the office with him, because he corrected me mercilessly. It was great. But Daniel Webster was a great guy, and he is a conceptual thinker too. And so he studied testing and said, path testing is the way to go. We path tested everything. And the programmers would give it to you, and you do a path test, and you'd say there's a bug here and a bug here. And the reason path testing is so great is that those bugs were almost always on the error paths. And I've learned through my career in quality and so forth that nobody, when they create processes or code, ever thinks of the errors. So they create the correct path through, and then they test that, and they go, yeah, it works. Well, unless this error happens, unless the person does this, unless this comes up, so error paths are the key to quality, and they're the key to good design, to good software coding. Anyway, so they never had a bug. So based on that experience, I have built, literally dozens of software systems, some of them at an enterprise level for other companies. And every single time I said, okay, we're going to start with a functional requirements document, and we're going to do path testing. Nope, can't afford a functional requirements document. But wait a minute, it will mean that you can get it in 100% of the time instead of 400% of the time. Nope, can't afford it.
We will now efficiently and effectively cut off our nose to spite our face.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you're dealing with this, and I can only imagine that as you're doing more of these projects, your understanding of these processes and ways of making them more efficient are just piling up in your head. I mean, you've got to be learning through this experience,
oh, yeah.
right? So where do you go after data general?
General Dynamics. So,
Oh, sorry, General Dynamics. Yes.
It's all right. Since you seem to like stories like this, let me tell you my one big General Dynamics story. So what I did was I created an entirely new structured design methodology for Ada that they really liked. But then I'm sitting in my at my desk, and the guy next to me, he was a young guy too, and he was from I think he was from Harvard, and he was a mathematician from Harvard, and I knew he'd been working. We couldn't talk about what we were working on, but I knew he'd been working for months crunching numbers on something just with a calculator all day long, crunching numbers. And my boss comes in and he taps me on the shoulder and he goes, "Come with me." I'm like, "Okay." Takes me into the this area of the building I'd never been in before, and there's this big conference room with like 25 people sitting around the table and another 25 people standing behind them. And he goes, "Sit down in this chair." Okay. You got to realize I'm like, I don't know, 26, 27, something like that. And maybe I'm 28 or 29. But anyway, I was young, right? And everybody else, I mean, literally, there were 4-star generals, admirals, the top brass of all the military were sitting around this table. And this was one of the defense projects, the major defense projects in the 80s that was funded. So I won't talk about what it is. I'll just say that it was in outer space. So they had to get a signal and make sure that they had a firing algorithm within the time that the signal could propagate through and fire within this very short time window. And we're all sitting around the table, and I get in the head guy, who may have well been the Secretary of Defense, but if not, it was like one of the top guys. He says, I think it was a military guy, but anyway, he said, "Okay, here's this problem that we have. We've calculated out that the signal will propagate. Okay, but how do we validate that before we spend, many, many, many millions of dollars to build a system? How would we possibly know?" And I mean, the answer instantly occurred to me, but I wasn't going to say anything because I was intimidated, right? So I was waiting for somebody else to say the answer. Nobody said the answer. Like every 5 minutes, he would pound his fist on the desk and go, "Damn it, we got to have an answer to this. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this?" And then, silence. Everybody's looking at each other. Everybody's looking down. Everybody's thinking. Finally, after like 15 minutes, I couldn't stand it any longer. I thought, okay, this is probably the stupidest thing in the whole world, but I'm gonna say it anyway. It'll probably kill my career, but here I go. So anyway, I kind of like timidly raised my hand a little bit, and he goes, "You, what's your idea?" And it kind of scared me. And he goes, "Speak up, boy." So, he said, "Stand up and tell us your idea." And so I looked over at my supervisor and he goes, "Stand up." So I stood up and I said, "Well, you're building this system on a PDP-11 platform. That's what I heard, right?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "And we know what the module design is. We just don't know what the propagation time through each module is because the code hasn't been written, right?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, we know what kind of code is going in each module. Why don't we create a little simulator for each module? We'll create the whole system, just the structure of it with a timer in each module based on what's going on there. And then we'll send all these different types of signals that you want, and it'll just let them propagate through the system in their normal propagation method and time as what comes out the other end." And he says, Says, "Could you do that?" I said, "Give me a programmer, I can do that." He said, how long will it take you? I said, 6 weeks. I said, go do it. Everybody got up and left the room. So starting the next day, my boss walked in with the programmer and we started working. And 6 weeks later, we gave him the software.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing bug-free.
I don't know, but it worked. What was interesting was that was the project that the guy sitting next to me had been working on. And it came out within like milliseconds of what he calculated, well within the time window. So I was, the programming thing seemed simple to me. What amazed me was that this guy spent months by hand calculating this stuff with all these variable possibilities through this entire structure and came out within milliseconds of the answer.
Wow. I was about to guess that he basically just rounded out to the nearest highest, it's all going to take at least 1 second or whatever. But if oh geez, that's a lot of freaking work.
It was a very narrow tolerance.
I'll believe it. But that's actually a good story. I like it. Thank you. So where does the journey take you next?
I think I can say without violating anything that you're shooting down missiles, right? So imagine a missile going through space from the time that you detect it until you have until you can hit it is a very short time window. Anyway, so then this all, I should have stayed at General Dynamics, and I could see my career path, and my boss talking to me saying, you can end up at the Pentagon, you can have a great defense career out of this. And I worked later. I later worked for companies with some military stuff in Washington, so I could see how that would have easily been possible, but I didn't like it. I guess growing up in the 60s with the Vietnam War and being part of the ineffectiveness of that system just grinded on my nerves. I mean, I couldn't stand the whole concept of, moving so slowly. And I understand why they did it, but it wasn't the environment I could be in. So I was only there like 3 months. And then my marketing friend, Dave Jenkins, the same one from Simutron, his wife was a mortgage company office manager. And so she knew exactly how mortgage software or how mortgage calculations worked. And this company had come out with this little calculator that you could put in and do mortgage calculations for real estate agents. But it was really crude and really hard to use. And the answers were in little cryptic things that nobody could understand. And he said, why don't you design a solution to this? So I looked around, and Panasonic again had just come out with these little calculators that had 10 keys, yes and no, and scroll buttons, and a alphanumeric one-line thing on it. And I said, hey, we can create a menu that you scroll down through, and when you select it, it gives you the answers not in something cryptic, but it can be 3 or 4 lines that scroll slowly with the numbers. And then it will be it'd be like computers are now, but nobody had a computer then, right? It'd be like a phone app. And so they were going to come out with these. They hadn't come out with them yet, but you could buy a prototype of them, and they stored the information on cassette tapes, little cassette tapes. And so I bought this prototype of it, and the prototype had all the keys on it, and I programmed it in their basic code, and it was 64K of memory. So I created this like crazy cool mortgage program for every kind of mortgage, VA, FHA, conventional, with all these parameters, and you could enter in your own needs, and it would tell you which one was best for you and all this kind of stuff. And you could also put in what the inflation rate would be for your house and what it would be worth in so many years and if you'd make money on it, all that for investors. So got it designed. Man, we're ready to go. We can sell this thing, right? And we were going to sell it for $200, which seemed like a lot of money. But remember, there were no phones or phone apps or a little, portable computers or anything. So for a real estate agent to be able to use that to sell a house while they're standing in the house with the person would be really valuable. And those little phone things cost us $60. So since we were going to sell a mail order, we'd make a decent profit.
Yeah, so, why not? Makes sense.
So
waste resources otherwise.
Yeah. So we ordered the first 10, and he started spooling up the advertising. And it took me 7 months at home after I left General Dynamics to get that coded. So we're all ready to go. We buy the 10 units. I download the program into the first one. It only goes in halfway. I'm like, what the heck? I tested a whole bunch of. Finally, I call up Panasonic. Now, in these days, this is still the 80s. In the 80s, Panasonic is like this company that doesn't speak hardly any English in Japan, who, this is a brand new product for them. I get some technical guy who I can barely understand, who can barely understand me, and I communicate to him that I'm trying to download the program, and he goes, oh, 32. I won't try to do the accent, but he's going, only 32. I'm like, 32K, that's all it holds, but it says here 64, and the prototype has 64, but we can only do 32. I'm like,
addressable memory, or because there was some kind of software preloaded on boot?
Total memory. So that was total memory. That included the data. There really was no data. I mean, there were some minor. The data was pretty much in the code. But, all the alpha scrolling and everything was in the code. Every character of code was that memory. So I said, well, are you ever going to come out with 64? Oh, yeah. In 2 months, we're going to come out with one with 64. So we waited. I mean, we didn't just keep waiting forever, but 2 years later, they came out with one with 64, and they charged $200 for it.
Oh, wow.
So another project down the tubes. But, you do the best you can.
Timing makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And so you're going through, I mean, the very technical nature of your career at this point it feels a long way away, at least technological computer technology sophistication. It's a long ways from where you were. What's your awareness during this period of what's happening in the home console and computer markets? You said that you were interested in, you had bought a VCS right from the get-go and so forth. What's your perception of the evolution of that side of the market while you're working with these more high-end machines?
Well, so within a couple of months of IBM coming out with their first machine in 82, I bought one before they even had hard disks. And then as soon as the hard disk came out, I bought one of those. And in those days, then you could buy an Amber CRT, which was great. And then they had, really crude video games. So I started getting those, and my kids were young. I think they were like ages. My boys were like 6, 8, and 10, and am I thinking right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 8 and 10, or 6 and 8, 6 and 8, and anyway, I don't remember, but they were young, and so we got like King's Quest. King's
nice.
Quest
Yeah,
1,
yeah.
2, 3, 4. We had Space Quest, and we would all get together at night and play those together every night. And the kids were so much better than I was. You'd get in a new scene, and I'd be trying to figure out, how do you do this? And where do you find stuff? They'd be bouncing around before I could even decide what to do. They had already bounced off every rock, tree, and tried everything possible and come up with the answer for it and how to beat the dragon in that scene and then move on to the next. So it was really fun to see how creative they were. So we did that. And then, I was always thinking, wow, now's the time to bring back Simutron. But those kind of things, time marches on in the market and people's thoughts and everything move beyond it. And then I was still in software, but I got into being a business management consultant and warehouse management systems. And warehouse management systems cost at the time like $1 million or more each, a lot of custom code in each one. I was a project manager who would sell them and deliver them. And so, I ended up inventing a new warehouse management system. And I was doing this as a consultant, not as an employee. And I designed a new warehouse management system that would, you didn't have to code to be able to set it up. So it was based on an entirely new concept. And I realized when I did it that I had really invented actual non-coding programming for computers. So I created a sales pitch for it, a pitch deck and everything, and I went to venture capitalists and I said, look, we can go to people who have warehouses. First of all, it will be worth it for them to buy our system. It'll cost them less than they're spending per year just on maintenance of their antiquated system. And their antiquated systems are hard-coded. With this, not only can they set it up in a couple of weeks, but they can instantly change it to modify it as their business changes. And their warehousing software systems were obsolete the week they were delivered, right? So I calculated that if we only got 1% of the market, the company would be worth over $1 billion. And because because it was so much cheaper and you could set it up yourself, we could expand the market from like 5 to 10,000 companies to 200,000 companies worldwide. And that would that's such a bigger piece of the market that the company, it would be huge. So I needed $6 million to do that. And to write the code, it was 12 man years. I designed the entire code completely, and I could step through it manually. So I would, get each kind of transaction. I would step through it. I had like the code on 3x5 cards, and I would write in what happened, and it was all based on RF scanning and everything. Anyway, I went to venture capital, and I had 40 venture capital companies say, I approached 40 venture capital companies, and I had 10 of them say, wow, we're really interested. And one of them said, we're very, very interested. We'll go in with this other one. So they said, but we'll only give you $2.5 million. I said, but you don't seem to understand. In order to make it work, I could probably do the software with about 4 million, but in order to market it, I need and get it going, I need 6 million. They said, no, you don't understand. We're really not entrepreneurs. We're bankers. And we don't put up more than $2.5 million for a startup like this. And we get 50% for the first 2.5 million. And then we'll give you another round and we get another 50%. And then we'll do the final round to get you to 6 million. When you're ready to sell, we get another 50% for that. And by the way, you have to have 4 other people. You can't just do it yourself. Even though I had another person who was going to be the exec, they said, no, each one of those has to have an equal ownership to yours or very close to it. So it would end up that I would be, yeah. So, first they have 50%, then they have 75%, then they have 92%. And then I end up with like a fourth or a fifth of that. And I said, why would I do that? And they said, because, 1% of $1 billion is better than, not having it.
That's.
And I said, yeah, but I don't have any control over it. I mean, you can fire me the next day. And from everything that I've read and that people that I've talked to, that's what you do. that's the norm. And they said, yeah, but you'd still have your stock. And it's, yeah, but then it would be out of my control. And they said, well, then you're a control freak, not a real entrepreneur.
Oh, that's bull. That is total bull.
Yeah. So anyway, I said, no, thanks. So I still had that system. I'm still thinking about doing it someday. But then, so during that time, I worked as a business management consultant. And what I discovered is that warehouse processes were really stupid. I mean, the people that set them up. I guess that's kind of critical. But what I meant was, instead of buying $1 million for a warehouse management system, I could get them like 60% of the savings and the quality, the error proofing for a 6-month project. So I would charge them $200,000 and they'd get 60% of the bang for the buck. And then if they wanted to get a warehouse management system, they could. So I was doing a bunch of those systems. And then I met a business management consulting group from the Big Five that had all been in the Big Five. And they would only hire Big Five consultants. But because I knew so much about logistics and warehousing, they went ahead and allowed me as a consultant to join their group as they had 14 people in their group. Me and one other guy were independent management consultants. And I worked there for some 10 years after that. And I got into Six Sigma. Are you familiar with Six Sigma?
No.
So in quality, there's two kinds of methodologies in quality. There's Lean and there's Six Sigma. And Lean is really, and I became a Lean master and a Six Sigma master black belt. So in Six Sigma, you get trained as a green belt. And then if you only do Six Sigma full time and you're helping other people, you get trained as a black belt. And then master black belts are trained to set up Six Sigma departments for big companies. And that was at the early days of Six Sigma. So I became a master black belt and did a lot of those projects and trained, hundreds and hundreds of black belts and green belts. And
cool.
Yeah.
So this, do you ever get the yearning to get back into gaming in a big way?
It's too cutting edge. It's too
interesting answer.
It's too bleeding edge for me. It's too risky. In other words, you put forth so much effort, and the risk is so great that I can't afford to do it now. I'm too old.
Too hit driven too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's just too many safer ways to make money. My last business was that I was doing. So I understand process, right? That's my forte. And I understand models. I kind of do models in my head. I always have. So even in Six Sigma, what I would really do is I would look at everything. The model would occur to me in my head, and then I would take the methodology and back up my idea with it, but and use it to present with. But I'm really an analyst and a modeler. That's probably who I am naturally. So I realized because of that people don't know how to start businesses. And I've started a bunch of businesses and I've helped other people start them. And I was consulting with a lot of small people for free just to help them. And I thought, they just don't know the process. So if I put together the step-by-step process with everything in the right order, then that would be useful to people. And I could go out and I could look at all the hundreds or thousands of books that have been written on business and find all the different parts and just put them together in the right order. So I did that for a couple of years. I did this big research. I actually read 3,600 books cover to cover, and I skimmed through 35,000 books. And yes, I am a speed reader. And I learned that about 10% of books are written by university professors for the market of university professors and universities, which is big companies, right? Nothing for small companies or entrepreneurs, all for big companies with standardized operations. If they do it entrepreneurial, it's for great big enterprise level entrepreneurial efforts. Then there's about 10% of books that are written by actual entrepreneurs who said, yeah, these two things that I did, they were my key things. And entrepreneurs way overestimate their abilities. It's been proven statistically that they'll have a hit, they will make billions of dollars, and then the next three companies will be total failures. And so they know how to do that one thing that they got lucky doing. And by the way, most entrepreneurial success is luck. If you read Fooled by Randomness, it's a great book that lets you know that what the probability is, even in the stock market and entrepreneurism and so forth. But anyway, the other 80% of books are written by writers who know nothing about business, who read the books written by the university professors and write it in a more entertaining, easy to understand fashion, but they invariably get it wrong. And a lot of people read it and it's screwed up. So that's how the whole concept came, that you have to do a business plan first. You don't do a business plan first. You can't do a business plan first. You don't even have the information. You don't even know what you're doing when you start with. There's certain research that you have to do, and there's certain research that you do to even understand if you should even do this business and what it should be. And then, anyway, I ended up mapping out a little over 60 critical steps. And then depending on what area your new business is, another 60. But about 60 core steps of starting a business. And you need to do those in the right order. And it's not out there anywhere. So I put together training for each one of those steps. And the idea, the company's called BizSteps. And I have BizSteps website. And the idea is that you take a lesson, and each step, or you take the lesson on one step. And when you finish that step, it's not just training like Udemy or something, where you learn it. It's interactive. So first part of it is you learn it. And the second part of it is you apply it interactively with forms and so forth for your actual business. And at the end of that step, you have built that part of your business. Because what is building a business? Building a business is answering 10,000 questions. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But you got to ask the right question at the right time in the right order, and know that you got the right answer before you go on to the next question, because they all build on each other. That's what the process is. And so I created this online training, interactive training, and I got through about, I think I was probably like 6 months away from actually launching it. And I was letting a lot of people do it to vet it as I went. And people were, man, this is really great. The first phase was, what kind of business should I start? And it helped you come up with a business if you didn't know one, or vet your current idea. And that was all free. And then at the end of that, then you'd start paying. And you pay by the month for the training. And then if you needed help, you could get a personal business consultant that would advise you. Anyway, I was about 6 months away from launching that when it was 2020, and right before the elections, and I was going crazy with the political divide and all the propaganda by both sides. I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't focus on my business. It was just freaking driving me crazy. And finally, I told my wife, I said, I've got to solve this. Nobody else is solving this. I've got to do it. And she said, okay, because she's supporting us. She's been supporting us for, 8 years. And so she said, go ahead. So I spent a couple of years researching to find out, using my methodologies that I used in Six Sigma and solving problems, what's the root cause of the political divide? Once you know the root cause, then is there a solution out there somewhere in the world that we can just apply that we're not applying? So then I did a search of all the political systems in the world and all the political processes. And everything, here's another hint for all of your readers, all of your viewers, is that when you go to solve something, you don't look at systems, you look at the process in the system, because it's the process that produces the output, right? The structure of something doesn't produce anything. The inflow to the process, the processing, and the output is what's critical. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff like that in the BizSteps training too. That's pretty cool. But anyway, I looked through all the processes, the real processes, the way they're actually work, not the propaganda of how they work. And there's no solutions out there right now. And so I thought, well, what would the perfect solution be? So I took the two processes that are causing the problems in the US government, and I redesigned them. And then I went to 50 people and said, what do you think of this? And they're all like, wow, this is great. So I put it together in a book called End Politics Now, and just published it a few months ago and started the movement. And that's what I've been doing the last couple of years.
And I'm guessing that the solution wasn't just to get rid of politicians.
Yeah, we line them all up. No, see what you need to. So first of all, you can't just say, guys, can't we all get along? That's not going to change anything, right? In all the books that I read all the books on politics I could find, and going back like 70 or 80 years, and most of the ones on the political divide say, if you only get rid of those half of the people, everything would be fine. We just have to convince them to change their beliefs, right? But it turns out that I won't tell you everything in the book,
No.
unless you want me to.
No. This is part of this. There will be links to all of this in the show notes, so the listeners can go and pick it up. We don't want to give any spoilers, but you can give some hints at least. I am intrigued.
Well, here's the first hint: is that you can read my book online for free.
Oh well,
so you don't even have to buy it, and it's at endpoliticsnow.com.
Okay.
And but I'll be glad to send you other links. And so, yeah, the book's right there for free, and
Perfect.
You can join the movement there if you want. And I will say that the solution, when I got into it, and I'm not the one to originate the idea of a true democracy, but nobody could really make a true democracy scale to a federal level. And then on top of that, the founding fathers in the U.S. Hated democracy because it took their control away. So when they wrote the Constitution, they've been running the colonies in the U.S. for 150 years. They were the British aristocracy of the American colonies who ran everything. They were the leaders. They were the 1% of the 1% extremely wealthy elite in the colonies. And then they were actually the ones who fomented the American Revolution. We have this vision in America of all of these, like frontiersmen. We get tired of paying a tax on tea to the British, so they all got together and said, we're going to oust the British. No, what really happened was the elite aristocracy here said, hey, we're tired of paying our money in taxes to the British aristocracy. We want to become independent. And then they fomented this revolution with all of the other people. And the way they finally did it was kind of interesting. That's not worth spending the time on. But after the revolution, then they put up this government of states, like a cooperation of states, right? This confederation of states. But the states started doing a lot of democracy and a lot of true democratic laws. Why? Because the big promise that motivated all of the American people at the time was to be able to have a voice in government. Instead of being led by these elite people who had led us for 150 years, hey, we can help make decisions about our own lives. And so they started doing that, scared the heck out of elite who see that, oh crap, we're losing control. And like one of the things they wanted was a graduated income tax system. That's pretty scary if you've got a lot of money. So they came up with some good excuses to write the Constitution. And originally they didn't have a license to write, a license, you know what I mean? They didn't have permission. And what the goal wasn't to write the Constitution. They just all got together and wrote it and then said, here it is. But it completely took away democracy. So they had to sell it. And they, a lot of them had some big goals, like they wanted a king in the United States. Alexander Hamilton and Madison, everybody wanted a king, and they had big arguments, and they finally ended up with a president who had more power at the time than the King of England. And a lot of things that people don't realize. And so the elite had control, and they directly ran the government. And then a year later, one of the elite, Alexander Hamilton, started the first political party. And they realized that they could control the government through the political parties and step back and not serve themselves and not be direct targets. And that's what's been going on ever since. So you can't just say, let's kick them out. You have to have a viable, realistic alternative that works, right? That inoculates you against their control. And so I looked at the two processes that empowered them and said, how could we change these two processes to not empower them, to disempower them, and to give the people control? And there's some excellent people from the 50s through the 70s, university professors that wrote great things on democracy and great things. There's a book that just came out 2 years ago on the global elite that exposes how, the elite have gone global and they run the countries and the big banks and the financial
institutions
of the world. Thank you. So the challenge then was, how do you make a democracy that can scale? And a company, a nonprofit company out of Washington, and I can't remember the name of the company, but they came up with this software called Polis, POL.is. And the software allowed you to, it was survey software. So like they used it in Germany, actually. And one of the examples I quote in the book is from Germany. And in Germany, they asked the people, how are you doing? What do you think we need to do for Germany? What's the problems? Where do we need to go from here? It was just really open-ended general question. They had 35,000 people respond, which I don't remember the exact population in Germany, but I calculated it out. It's
80 million, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's a 99%. It means that it's that 99% of the time, like usually in medical research, it's 95% margin of error.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not it. It's 95%. Come on. My mind does that sometimes. Unfortunately, I'm autistic, so sometimes my mind just turns off.
I hear you.
I think it's like I think ahead of my thoughts and then I can't get them back. But anyway, normally it's 95%. So what that means is that 95% of the time, or 19 out of 20 times, you're going to get that same result, from the real population. And then the margin of error is, what the answer is plus or minus some amount, right? So 35,000 out of 80 million, that was 99%, whatever that number is, with
accuracy.
Yeah, with less than 1% margin of error. And so, it really represented the German people. Well, anyway, the way this works is, their software works, is you you go in to take the survey, and you see a statement that somebody else has made. Like, the German people would be better off if the foreigners who are living here would pay more in taxes. Or we want more immigration, or And then you see a statement like that and you agree with it, disagree with it, or pass on it. And then after you rate 10 of those, you can then enter your own statement. And so you read a bunch of statements, and if you haven't read one that expresses your opinion, then you enter your own statement. People would typically read like 50 or 100 statements of other people to find out what other people were thinking and assess those statements before they enter their own statements. And then when you assess a statement, that's really equivalent to making your own statement, except it's much faster. I mean, if somebody says, we should have more immigration, and I say yes, that's like me saying I should have more immigration, right? And so you take all those statements. I think they had just under 800 unique statements made. And if it's not a unique, don't count it. And then they had like 2 million. Yeah, I can't remember the exact numbers, but anyway, they had something like 2 million assessments. They had 35,000 people take it. They had like 2 million assessments and 800 unique statements.
Answers or responses.
Yeah. So then if you look at those, then they said, okay, how many people answered the same, right? How many people agreed or disagreed? And then those would be consensus statements. So if over 60% of the people agreed or disagreed with the statement, they put that on a list of consensus statements. And they also did a dot plot showing that at one end was 100% agreement. At the other end was 50% agreement. So if you think about it, it can't get any worse than 50% agreement, right? Because then it would be 51-49. So anyway, 50-50 means that it's split right down the middle. 50% of the people want it, 50% don't. So that's very divisive. That's as divisive as you can possibly get, 50-50. To the other end, where 100% of the people agree or disagree. Almost all the dots out of 800 statements, almost all those were at the agree or disagree, were at the consensus end, very high at the consensus end. So what that means is that if you take a topic let's take a hot topic like abortion, man, that's a dangerous topic to bring up. And you think if there was a divisive topic, that would be it. But when you look at individual statements about abortion, the first statement is, I disagree with abortion. Okay, well, there's one statement about it. Who cares? But the real statements are like, well, abortion's okay if it's like in this situation, or abortion's okay, but it's too early, or it's too late. Or see, there's all these nuances of the details of abortion. And when people start making statements about it, the first round of statements everybody makes is about the general part. And everybody starts with where they're at with their bias. But then after they read those, they start going, well, what about this? It starts making them think. And then there's a second round and a third round. And those statements start getting more and more consensus. And you find out that people really have a consensus. And you can take those consensus statements and find out and make laws around them. So they did that in Taiwan. This guy came up with a website, a private website where he put the Polis software on there. And a big controversy was Uber, and said, should we have Uber? Because the taxi drivers were against it, right? And Uber wanted to get there. So everybody did that. And there were hundreds of unique statements. And it ended up that most of them had a consensus, and they were able to use that to negotiate an agreement that everybody voted on. And then all the people would vote on that agreement, and they had over 80% of the people say they agreed with that. Now, that's a good process in itself, but it doesn't move people. So what I did was I came up with a process that starts with that, which is really your bias of where you're at. And then but it doesn't just ask questions about what do you think. It asks questions about what do you think? What do you need out of this? And other similar questions. There's like 12 or 13 questions that it leads people through. And it leads people from your bias to, oh, that's how this affects everybody else as well as me, to empathy, to and it uses collective intelligence. So a lot of studies have shown that collective intelligence is much more intelligent than the biggest expert and any governing group of people. And so it takes the collective intelligence of everybody's right there in this process, plus collective empathy, plus collective compassion. So it leads them through this process of, this is where you're at. Now it helps them develop empathy for everybody involved, helps them understand where everybody's coming from, helps them develop compassion for everybody. And then collectively, everybody comes up with a solution. Now it's moved them from, this is the problem, to how can we solve this? Now their brain's in a totally different place. It's in a problem solving, let's work it out space, cooperating space, and leads them to a consensus solution. And there's a bunch more to it than that, but that's kind of the basis. So I call it a collaborative democracy. And so the first part of the book gives the history of what the root cause is and why. And then it shows what's going on all around the world and why there is no solution in the world. And then it helps you understand why this is the solution, why it's designed the way it is. And then why, how it works exactly. It's a blueprint. It's not an idea. I mean, I don't do ideas, unfortunately. I could sell a lot more books. If I put out a 100-page, 120-page book with just an idea in it, I would sell millions. But, unfortunately, it's a 240 content page blueprint with a lot of detail in it. It's not light reading. It's not something you take to the beach and, read in an afternoon. But it has a real solution in it. My next step is going to be create videos that explain it, so people don't have to read it. And I'm just about to upload a Audible's version. But anyway, it's pretty cool, I think. And it's a realistic, workable solution for a true democracy at a federal level, enabled by technology. We could never have done it until 10 years ago. We just didn't have the technology. But now we have the technology that we can actually do a true democracy at a federal level. And there's other things like federal councils and stuff that the whole blueprint describes how to do the administration, even if the people are helping, make the laws. But that's the book.
Interesting. Perfect. And like I said, those links will be in the show notes. So we conclude every interview with a question. Now, looking back at your career, and in your case, I mean, it's not just video games, but I would also be including in this case your entire time in the process management in the technology field. Looking back at what you've done, what was one technological development that hit huge that you just didn't see coming? And what was one technological development that you thought was going to be big that went nowhere?
Okay. Probably, well, of course, the internet was mind-blowing. I had some interaction with IBM in the very early days of the internet, in the late 70s, before there was an internet for everyone else. Mm-hmm. And it was just like an international forum chat, where, the scope that IBM envisioned for this of the engineers was, hey, it's so cool. I have this problem and I post it on the chat board in the forum, and I go to bed, and the next morning, somebody from Tokyo and somebody from Germany has posted an answer to it. And I can, what it really is a collective form of intelligence, right? It was a tool for collective intelligence. And we're just really indoctrinated that experts and authority, we're indoctrinated with hierarchy, right? As a civilization, we've been indoctrinated with hierarchy for thousands of years, that only the elite can rule. They're the smartest. They have the best education. They have the experience. They have all the answers. We're crazy for letting the normal people. And In fact, I was thinking about that in the American Revolution, in 1787, when they wrote the Constitution, suddenly they had the printing press. That was a relatively new thing, that they could print stuff for everybody. So how do we control people? Well, the printing presses, right? 100 years later, it's like, oh man, now we have radio, and then we have TV. How do we control everybody? The media. We control the media companies and the message that's going out there. Now all of a sudden there's the internet. Wow, nobody anticipated the internet and what it would do. It gave everybody a voice. And we complain about social media because there's trolls and people disagree with us. I don't care what statement you put down there, $100 is good. You're going to get people going, you're going to get people who are your friends going, oh yeah, that's good for you. They didn't even read the post. You're going to get people who read it and go, yeah, I like $100. And then you're going to get people who go, no, $100, that's terrible. You're a capitalist. So,
or you're going to get the ones who say dollars, Bitcoin, put it into.
Right, exactly. All these different perspectives. Well, with collective intelligence, like under my system, you need all that. The more diversity, the better the answer. That's what all the studies have showed. And that's for only particular types of problems. But it turns out that national governing type of decisions are the perfect ones for collective intelligence. Administration there's a better way to do that. But anyway, the internet represents a collective voice. And suddenly everybody's talking. And suddenly, hey, I found out this, and the government's telling me this, but that's not true. A whole bunch. I won't go into it because everybody will get upset on both sides. And when I wrote my book, I started out with examples from both sides. And everybody that read it in the first version said, well, all those examples about that other side, yeah, those are great. But the ones about my side, those are false. I don't like your book. So that's why the examples come from the Revolutionary War period so heavily, because anything current is going to, make people angry. But what do you do about that? Well, you create a divide. You divide the people so that they can't talk about you. They talk about, they're fighting each other. You can't control the internet. So you focus people on each other instead of us. And also focusing people on each other creates more attention, gets more attention. So the media loves it because attention is their product that they sell to advertisers, right? They want all of your attention that they can get. And the algorithms are honed for getting attention, what's your attention. And lies and stuff spreads like 6 times faster than true information. So the media, they're sold on it, and the major political parties love it, and here we are divided, and we wonder why. It's all structured. So I guess that's a lot about why the internet is the biggest change, but it's the biggest societal change. It allows SaaS, software as a service that can be maintained, and you couple that with your phone. Phone has apps on it, but the apps aren't any value without the internet, right? It's the internet that makes the phone a computer in your hand. So, I think that the phone being an actual computer this big that can not just make a phone call, but run full-blown computer software, that's really impressive, but it's enabled by the internet. So I think the internet is the mind-blowing change that nobody ever anticipated. It's the black swan that changed everything. And I'm hoping my political system is the black swan that changes politics forever.
Gotcha. And what was something that you bet on that did not go anywhere?
Every company I started. Oh, man. I made money on some companies and lost on others, but what I I would say what see, what was the exact question again? What did I bet
So
on that didn't?
what technology did you think was going to get huge that ended up just fizzling out and going nowhere?
Nothing really comes to mind except virtual reality, I guess. Um, I mean, when virtual reality came out, man, I got one of the first headsets. I was into virtual reality games, but they were pretty crude and the games were kind of crappy. And, at first it was a novelty.
Hmm.
And I thought it's an interesting thing, actually. This hasn't occurred to me previously until now, but when you read a book, the story is generated inside your head, right? Your
Yeah.
brain fills in all the details of what you're reading. The book
Yeah.
creates a scene for you and a storyline and some characters. But if you actually write out what that information is, it's very limited information. Your mind fills in all those gaps and creates this whole story in your head. And the story that would be going on in my head and with the same book would be different than the story going on in your head, right? And
That's
then
very true.
when you see the movie, um, very rarely does the movie live up to the book. And even when it lives up to the book, it misses the important nuances that were so relevant in the storyline of the book that gave a, I mean, in a book, in a movie, what really happens? People end up living or dying or, accomplishing something or not. But it's always around some struggle. And at the end, the guy's standing or not standing. Whereas in a book, you learn all these life lessons and these new concepts and ways of dealing with other people and ideas and ways of solving problems, and just all these things happen in stories that are incredible. I think games are kind of like that. So I look back at Dungeons and Dragons and all the strategic war games, with the little armies and tokens that you'd move around a hexagonal board. Those were great. I mean, you had to have real strategy to do those, and to think about it. And you might be the side that maybe they're a historical game, and you're the side that lost, and you're just trying to figure out a better way to change history and win. And it makes it alive in your head as opposed to I win or I lose, or I live or I die kind of thing. But video games, and so they had the King's Quest and Space Quest, where you've got to discover stuff and figure it out. And then they kind of had that with Myst, and that genre. But I expected that to go further. And especially when virtual reality came along, I thought people would take that and it would become this amazing new live-in adventure thing, even more than ever before. But virtual reality, where did it go? I mean, it's kind of, we've got in this area of, I forget what the word is, but it's not virtual reality. It's
AR. It's augmented reality.
Right. So, that's nice to have temperature and, phone messages and texts appear on my glasses, I guess, or the map or something when I'm driving around. It's good to get more information. And I think that's probably where we'll go in the future, to some way of getting more information. But we're so information heavy, people don't know what to do with it anyway, because there's no process built into the information. That's where people need to go. And that's where I've always felt that computer software is lacking. They give you information, but no process behind it that leads you to a solution. And, doesn't ever tell you what you need to do.
Interesting. Yeah.
I had some training the other day on, as I was doing my book, and for the Audibles version, I got audio training and audio editing training, right? So the guy taught it just like they teach Six Sigma. In Six Sigma, they go, here's a methodology and here's 100 statistical tools over 2 weeks. At the end of the time, everybody's like, what? Now go do it. Nobody knows what to do. So they have a black belt that kind of mentors them through their first project. But, in this training critique at the end of the training, I told the guy was, you didn't give me a process. I want to know how to edit my file. Tell me how to start at the beginning. When I run into a problem, what do I do? Because I take your process that you said how to do and it didn't work. I figured it out, but there were no error processing. There's no process built in. So that's what we really need, I think. And that's where I hope things go. But I'm surprised it didn't go there with virtual reality, because what a great opportunity it had.
Well, virtual reality has a couple of drawbacks. Primarily, price is extremely high. Then you have the simple fact that a huge chunk of the population can't use it without getting massive headaches after a very short period of time. Then you have an additional to that, it's a pain in the butt. You got to set it up. You've got to make sure there's enough room around you. If you live in a small apartment or you have a lot of furniture, suddenly it all becomes inaccessible. And then you still have the cables. So you get tangled up in the cable or something. It's the effort that goes into getting a VR session set up is the barrier to entry. It's not like playing a game on your phone where literally you just pick it up while you're sitting on the john and, play a round of something. And
I see what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
but the way
it's a sheer mechanical issue. It's what I call the Wednesday rule. The Wednesday rule in any scenario, be it trying to, I'm a lawyer by trade. So if you're trying to imagine a day-to-day if you're trying to imagine a person's life, if you're writing fiction or imagining a character's motivations or a witness's motivations, try to walk them through a typical Wednesday of their life. And this is when you start getting into mechanics of day-to-day operations. And I'm a firm believer that the everyday mechanics of operations are far more influential on the outcomes than anything else, even the inputs.
That's the process that I refer to.
That's the process. And so this is where we come up with the problem of what effort do I have to put in to get to this game in VR? And if that effort is if the effort and the added benefit is not equal to the value of the lesser object. So the game on the phone may not be as immersive, may not even be as in-depth, but if I get, let's say, quick 2 minutes of enjoyment out of it, as opposed to 2 minutes of enjoyment that cost me 30 minutes ahead of time, VR is always going to lose. This is where the arcade, now back to the point in question, the arcade and the idea that you had with Simutron was perfect, because I didn't have to set it up myself. It was a destination. I was going to drive to this place. I knew I was going to spend several hours there. I could get that experience without the personal effort and long-term personal investment financially and equipment. And that's where that kind of world would exist.
And you could do it with your friends.
And that's the other thing. You make it a destination, right. And at the same time, it was compartmentalized enough that I didn't have to be like, well, it's going to be a 30-hour game. Well, if it's a 30-hour game, which is what I might play on my PC or my game console, then I want to be able to sit down on a comfortable couch at home and play at my leisure at night after work and so forth. So now the experience in the arcade has to be a reduced experience. The game it has to be fun and fulfilling within the 30 to 120 seconds that I'm going to get for my quarter, or, the 15 minutes I'm going to get on this. And that's a game design question. So, and the problem with Myst, which primarily was the fact that to be honest, if you go back, the game sucks.
Yeah.
It was a terrible game because it didn't actually immerse you. It showed you a world, but it didn't immerse you in the society of that world, because it was
Right.
a dead world, because
Right.
they couldn't portray people walking around. This is where the King's Quest games felt more alive, because you could interact with people. Now,
Right.
very limited interactions, but still. And so from the point of view of the interactive fiction, of telling stories, and this is where I prescribe to Alan Moore, famous writer of comic books, British guy. He calls himself a magician. He says the art of storytelling is magic because it changes the world by changing the world view of the listener. And that will in turn change their actions. So the storyteller is a magician. And I think that there is value there. There's a lot of value to those stories. And then the question is, what is the value proposition, or what is the added value in the influence of the masses of a good storyteller?
Mm-hmm.
How do you quantify that in a calculation of where the masses will go with their opinions once you add one really good storyteller into the mix? Because people's opinions can change really, really fast.
Yeah.
But, oh well,
That was very good.
Thank you.
I
It's
enjoyed it.
the bigger thought processes on all this. And then, of course,
Did you
have the
ever read
propaganda.
Heinlein?
Yes, of course. Starship
Yeah.
Troopers, yeah. Although I was a much bigger Herbert fan. I read a ton of Herbert back in the day. Eyes of Heisenberg is one that always stuck with me, in the Heaven Makers. That was another good one. But, what I can really recommend, even though the first book has a terrible, terrible pun at the end of it, Destination Void. There's, I think, 4 books in the series.
I didn't read
And yeah, it's actually a book. It predates Dune. And it is exactly about this idea of how does a society organize itself, and how can you keep reinventing a society, trying to find the better solution. It's a fascinating little setup that he builds in there. But
that. What was the name of that?
Destination Void.
Okay.
And yes, I'll just warn you, the last page, there's a terrible pun. I don't know why it's in there. It's just bad. It makes no sense. But the rest of the book is excellent. And then you have to read the second one, which is, I believe, called The Jesus Incident. They're not easily, it's hard to figure out which ones to read, because the titles do not give any reference to the previous ones.
Okay.
But it's that, I think, the Dosity Experiment, and then the Lazarus Effect. But it plays with the idea of, it adds religion to it, which, not a religious person, but the idea of the storyteller comes into it. And so, very powerful stuff in that regard. But okay, I think we're done here. It's we've been chit-chatting for 2.5 hours at this point. I think that's probably more than the listeners are going to want to listen to, but screw them. I do this for myself. So, any final thoughts, Brent?
It's been fun to reminisce, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. Thank you.
No problem. It was a pleasure to have you here. So everybody, remember, all the links to everything we talked about and sources on it are going to be in the show notes. And check out Brent's books. And see you next time.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.